Hello and welcome to another episode of the Roundtable. Today, the team and I are going to discuss how we could kind of fit our mentality around the selection process that's kind of taken place, especially in Australia. So, for most of our Australian viewers, as you guys may already know, especially in the APU, the selection process to kind of get yourself from local to state to nationals has changed a little bit so that nationals does become this more exclusive event, right? So I think as a whole, it's a positive in the sense that, you know, people that do go to nationals are deserving to get that spot. However, on the flip side, what that means is it might also exclude a lot of the people previously who have gone to nationals, right? So one of the things that we do need to consider as coaches, and I guess this is the conversation to have it, where it's like, how can you still enjoy powerlifting and keep it as something that you can think about across the year without having nationals as that plan, especially if it is an uncertainty, right? So I'll open the board to you guys. Leanne, did you want to jump in first and kind of give your, I guess, insight as to where your head's at with people that are kind of in that middle way where it's like you might not make it to nationals?
Yeah, sure. I guess like the main thing with powerlifting, right, is you have to enjoy the process. So being able to enjoy the training aspect itself rather than just the competition, because really at the end of the day, like you're doing maybe max 4 competitions a year. So that's like 4 times per year, whereas week to week, you might be training 4, 5, 6 days a week. It's like that's the process that you have to enjoy in itself, I guess, when it comes down to it. But then having a plan, like looking ahead at the year, and then I guess determining whether it is that you want to be competitive or not. And it's okay if you don't want to be. Like if you want to just do the sport to have fun and enjoy it, that's completely fine as well. Because yeah, at the end of the day, it's like we're not really getting paid to do the sport. You have to enjoy what you're doing. And then yeah, working with your coach and figuring out the plan from there, rather than setting expectations too high, or like being able to adjust them as you go along as well. So yeah, making sure your expectations kind of meet where you're at. Otherwise you just end up kind of going down a rabbit hole and yeah, not enjoying the process, I guess.
Yeah. I think like when you bring up expectations, right? I think the whole reason why this could create such a split, especially with this kind of like update to the selection process, is like the people that are competitive enough can kind of double down on that, but it puts people in this weird position where it's like, do you want to go all in on this or not? Right. And it gets difficult when there are people that just, you know, either just progress wise are unable to do that, or they just can't hit that next level or are unable to commit. So I think one of the strategies that could help is not putting nationals on a podium in a sense. No pun intended.
No pun intended, Danny.
Yeah. But I guess like if you're not prioritizing nationals, right, that means you could kind of push locals as hard as you can, states as hard as you can, and then kind of have that as your circuit. I think that's a very viable way to have it, because then you're not kind of saving gas in the tank every year and feeling like you've not completely realized or put something on the platform that you're proud of.
Yeah, I agree. Like, say, for example, like you just said, having states as that one main goal, if you know that, you have to be realistic in a way. And if you know that you're not going to make it to nationals, have that goal of states and have, work towards that and put all kind of your energy in towards that, and then work your way around states essentially. But or if it's a local comp, like, yeah, there's ways around it if you're not like wanting to get to nationals or not wanting to push it to that next level, because it does like take time and energy out of your week, to be able to be competitive in the sport, especially like as more people are getting into it in Australia. There's more people and more competition, so being able to kind of keep up with it is is tricky. It's not something that you can kind of just cruise into.
Yeah.
I think that
Sam,
like also ties
jump in.
into like you can only control what you can control in the sport too. And at the end of the day, like whether you're someone who's going into states in a position who like you're really in a battle and you know you're going to be in a battle to potentially podium, or you're somebody who may not be moving on to nationals, and that's okay. That's just where you are at with like within your powerlifting journey and within like, you know, your competition pool and things like that. Either side or either option, like if you are controlling every variable that you can control from your end, and you know you can walk onto the platform and you know say that you have done everything in your power, you know, against yourself to be better than you were at your last competition, or better than you were, you know, X weeks ago, whatever that looks like. I guess any result should be celebrated, whatever that result ends up being, right? I think that's like that kind of ties into the expectations as well, because you know you could be someone who controls every variable. You know, you train as hard as you can, you know, you put on X kilos to your total. And I think in the sport of powerlifting, it can become very easy to, if you don't finish where you want to finish, depending what that expectation is, all you fixate on is that, like you fixate on like the result that was not necessarily what you wanted. But if you've controlled everything and that's just like how either the sport of powerlifting works, or just again like your competition within the weight class you're in, you know, there definitely comes a time where something has to give a little bit, and you shouldn't be too harsh on yourself too. So I think it does come down to like your expectations. You hands down as an athlete and as a coach with your athletes saying like, you know, we controlled every single thing we could, and that this is just like the result, because that is at the end of the day, it's a sport, it is powerlifting. You know, there are sometimes things that happen on the platform that, you know, no one is prepared to happen, or like it's just it's out of your control. So I think it's also, you know, looking at those variables too.
Just to segue off that, I think the biggest or the hardest thing, you know, with this new kind of qualification process in the short term is that it's for these lifters that are on the cusp of, you know, going to nationals or not. I can understand where like a lot of like kind of my athletes have, you know, felt disheartened and frustrated by this new rule, because it's been last minute in the sense that they have had this goal to go to nationals. They were training to go to states, then go to nationals. And then all of a sudden, like you said, Shania, they can't control it. It's out of their control now. And now it's up to what the competitors are doing in terms of getting podium and then moving forward. So I can definitely understand from a short term in terms of like this calendar year of competitions, how it can be quite disheartening for a lot of our athletes, you know, who are on that cusp. But I guess if we look on the other side of the coin now, the positive of it is that from a long-term like planning process, these athletes now have, you know, motivation and sort of some goals to hit, directing them into local, interstate, so they can push states really hard to get to nationals. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it sucks in the short term because, you know, some goals for a lot of athletes have been kind of put to a halt or up in the air. But in the long term, I guess, you know, as coach athlete, we can really work together with all of our clients to set some benchmarks, set some long-term planning in terms of what year they want to be at this total to have the best chance of going to nationals XYZ. So definitely two sides of the coin with how it's kind of all unfolded, positives and negatives. But I think, yeah, from a long-term planning stage, like we really have a chance now for the athletes that do want to take it more competitive, they can really set some targets and set some goals and have some direction with their training for states and beyond.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanna
Oh, sorry, Danny.
You go.
I was just going to say one last thing, like onto what Sam sort of said, is that I think like long term, it is going to create in a way, for a lot of new lifters, a lot of longevity in sport, because it can also come down to that conversation around expectations where it's like, well, you know, as Leanne said earlier, like you have to enjoy the process, and the process isn't just getting on the competition platform 4, 5, 6 times a year, like it potentially was, or like you can, like no matter, you know, if you're doing a number of local comps, if you're doing a number of novice comps, whatever that looks like, it can now become a conversation that if you have an athlete who is on the cusp, like Sam just said, it's like, you know, that conversation can now look like, why don't we actually take time off competing, have a year off competing, have a year off having to peak really hard, taper, constantly be on mentally, physically in training, where to the point where that's where that burnout can come from, and people get a little bit too tired and they get really frustrated and they're not seeing the progress they want. So it's like, why don't we have this long off season? Why don't we have, a year off actually hitting the platform, work really hard on like you just focusing on you, building your total within the, within the gym, getting yourself lifting to a very high competition standard all year round, so that then when it comes to a year down the track and this same sort of selection process is in order, your athletes are in the best position possible, both physically and mentally, to actually give it their all, right? Rather than, I guess, the athlete constantly trying to get on the platform, walking away potentially with the same result, and then, as I said like earlier, where they're fixating on sort of that result, which isn't, they may put, 20, 30 kilos on their total, but it's like they walk away feeling like, well, I didn't podium. So like, why does it matter? But it's like, you just put 30 kilos on your total. Like, that's awesome. So I think it's like, as Sam said, there's a lot of long-term planning that can come out of the new selection process now. And there's a lot of like, I think longevity in the sport in a sense as well, with like the new sort of process too. Yeah.
I want to reframe it and also give a bit of love to the people that do actually enjoy competing as well, though, right? Because like this whole discussion we've had up until this point is for the people that are on the cusp and kind of feel that sense of like disheartenment and things like that. But you've also got the people that do want to end up pushing, and despite being on the cusp, it's like, there's something at stake here when you are almost trying to get to nationals, but you're not quite there, right? So there's this extra motivating factor now that I've kind of seen, where it's like, if you're number 4, 5, or 6 and you're still quite close in terms of the pack, it's like your result matters compared to what you'd hit previously, where it's like, all right, I'll just do my best and I'm still going to go to nationals, right? That's not the case anymore. So I think because there's something at stake, like for those that do want to go to nationals and want to compete, it kind of puts a little bit of pressure earlier on in the year to kind of be like, all right, make sure everything is dialed in, because your spot's not guaranteed.
Yeah,
so,
I agree.
Yeah,
I think like if you look at other sports as well, that's a normal selection process. So I think it's a really positive step for I guess competitive powerlifting in Australia. Because like, I guess pressure is a privilege in a way, and it actually helps, especially with people who are competitive. It helps you push your training even harder to be able to get to that next level, essentially. So I think it is a good thing.
Yeah. I guess we could segue this then to say what happens on the day. And we've had multiple podcasts with like game day coaching, but say we're in a position where you do expect to podium and you do want to progress. What are some things that you can kind of focus on as an athlete versus leave up to the coach?
I mean, we saw it at New South Wales, like states, obviously just the weekend gone. But I think as an athlete, like the biggest thing that you like, all that you need to do on the day on comp is like trust your coach and like stay out of what's happening, like stay out of the games that the coach is playing, or stay out of like the maths that they are doing. Like, you as an athlete need to focus on the one lift at a time on the platform. Like, you need to, it's like you get to the comp, you're there, like you need to get yourself ready. It's like you're warming up, and then it's like you need to be thinking about one lift at a time. Like, you have 9 lifts, it's 9 minutes, it's 9 chances, like that's it. So it's like you can't walk onto the platform to hit your first squat and be thinking about what you're going to hit on your third bench or your third deadlift. Like, you need to do like one lift at a time. And like, all you need to be thinking about as an athlete is like executing it to the standard that you and your coach have held yourself to all throughout training, throughout like the whole year and every other competition you've done. And then focus, I said, like just focus on one thing at a time, because like, as we know as coaches, it's like a total is a total, and that's built up across the 3 lifts. So like, one, like don't rule yourself out. Obviously, the game like that we play as coaches, it's like you got to go 6 from 6, and then that's when the math starts. Like we're doing maths the whole time, but it's like deadlifts is like where we play the game. It's like where, like, I guess like the end result sort of comes from. So I think as the athlete, it's like, yeah, you just need to kind of stay away from that, and like you just need to focus on like your job, which is that one lift at a time.
Just really quick on that, it's really been interesting on the athlete things, like talking to these high level lifters who have had these big wins recently, like Nat Richards, Carl Johansson, Nathan, the junior who won 93s, talking to them about their like most recent wins, they haven't even known where they're at amongst their competitors until like second deadlift. Even like Carl Johansson, from memory, like he didn't even know where he was at. And like that's just a reflection of like how you can manage your mindset during that competition in terms of being able to execute and not letting the pressure get to you too much. Is just like you said, Shania, one lift at a time. You focus on squat, you focus on bench, and then the numbers start crunching. And then you can start worrying about kind of where you're at, or not even that, just leaving it up to the coach and still just focusing on, you know, intent at the bar and just blocking out that second, third deadlift.
Yeah. I think one thing I noticed over states is I did get to see how people, like, you can see experienced lifters despite not being like, because like what I'm about to bring up has nothing to do with like how strong you are. It's more so how many times you've done a competition and you know the flow of the comp day itself, right? So like people that are kind of just going in and like you said, like listening to the coach, but also not understanding where you need to be at the right time. So you might be delaying kind of your warm-ups. You haven't had your soft suit on. You haven't really like rehydrated or been focusing on nutrition. Those are all the little things that kind of pile up and build up momentum to make your day as smooth as possible so that when you do have your chance on the platform, you're in the best possible position, right? Because it's like at the end of the day, like you've peaked, you've tapered, that's done, and you can no longer control that. And so now all you can control is pretty much the 4 or 5 hours you're there. How are you going to optimize that, right? And for some people, they might be like socializing, they're out in the back room talking to their friends, things like that, and kind of like getting a bit lazy. Whereas people that I've seen who've done it over and over and over again, it's like, all right, you know you're about to warm up, soft suits on without even being told, knee sleeves are on, activation's already done, things like that, right? Like pretty much as soon as you finish your third squat, you're already rehydrating, you're setting up for bench press, so that you're able to have this process as seamless as possible. So I think as you start getting more experience, you realize that the time spent on competition time can be used wisely, versus because I think there's a lot of dead time if you don't know what you're doing, right? You're kind of like twiddling your thumbs. There's like 5 minutes in between warm-ups, but you could use those minutes as productively as you can.
Yeah, I think that's like the difference as well. Like obviously you do have those lifters who will be competitive, and then you have the lifters who will just be there to like socialize and have fun. That's obviously like a very different sort of, I guess, outcome and result. But I think it's almost becoming, especially in New South Wales states, like it's very obvious now, I guess, in the room, like who's sort of there as that more competitive, who is there more as that like social fun. But I think, as you just said, Danny, like especially like the more experience you have, I think you actually realize how fast comp day goes when you're more experienced too. Like I think, like I know even for me, like the very first comp I did, like you think that 10 minutes between squats and bench takes ages. Now I'm like, it feels like a second. And then like you've got to be back in that warm-up room, getting ready to bench, you know, like the time just flies. And I like that comes down to as simple things as like when you're warming somebody up and they're like, I'm just gonna go to the bathroom real quickly. And I'm like, we had 10 minutes to do that. Like, why are we doing it right now? Like in the middle of like bench warm-ups kind of thing. But I think that does come down to like, yeah, very much experience level, very much like kind of what you're there, like, what are you there to do? I think as an athlete, you know, it potentially does become a thought process of like, you're kind of there to do a job, right? Like comp day, you know, if you are that experienced lifter who does want to, you know, if you are there as competitive, it's a job on the day. Like, you know, you're there for a reason, like you're there to do something, you're there to set a standard, whatever that looks like. So it's like, you know, as the athlete, you can almost kind of control or also communicate to your coach, okay, this is like XYZ, this is what I'm doing now, like I'm doing this, like whatever. And then like vice versa, like the coach will kind of tell the athlete, okay, loads on the bar, take this, you know, kind of thing. So there's that sort of collaborative approach as well that still happens out the back.
Yeah. I think as well, like if you're just getting into the sport, I think it can be very valuable to do like just get yourself onto the platform early. And even if it's just like a couple of local comps before you do states, like even if you've already qualified, like it can be very valuable to be able to get onto the platform multiple times early. That way you can like get things out the way. You know, you're going to make mistakes along the way as well, and then you can kind of learn from that, and you kind of just keep building your own routine of what that looks like on comp day, because I guess everyone is a little bit different as well. So being able to really nail that down, you kind of like have confidence in yourself, and you feel like reassured and calm going into the day, because you know what you're there to do and you know what you need to do like with your routine. So I think that's something, I guess, like even if you're not going to nationals, just do like a couple of local comps. Like you don't have to just do one local comp and then go to states and that's it. Like get some time on the platform, I think can be really beneficial.
Just to tack back really quick on what Shania was saying about like comps being really fast. I think there's a certain element of like being over prepared almost to be able to adapt to what you have like on the day, whether it's like chaos in the back room, it's extremely fast paced, it's extremely slow paced, like being over prepared and just making sure you've got everything lined up to the point where like, you know where your water bottle is, you're placing your water bowl at the same spot, you know, with your salts in it, or your pre-workout is already dished up, ready to go, so you can have it like whenever you need to. I think that's just like one thing, just when Shana was talking about that, just reflecting on Worlds, is like, I did my normal process in terms of putting my gear on and all of that, like at the normal times, but then because it was so fast paced, I had that little element of being a little bit frazzled in terms of like trying to search around this busy as fuck warm-up room, trying to find my Gatorade when, you know, I had my warm-up to do in 2 minutes, because Jacob was like, all right, yep, you're going now. So it's like just being over prepared and just making yourself as comfortable as possible so you can adapt to whatever that competition day brings. I think that's another element of like just making sure you can have as much success and get as much out of the day as possible too.
Yeah. And I think the last thing that we could kind of talk about is like, because things are getting really competitive, right? And you've kind of seen it at the world level where people are opting to change their weight classes to kind of fit the mold as to where they're most potentially competitive. Shania, you're the nutritionist here. So like, I mean, have you yourself had those conversations where it's like maybe it's worthwhile for you to like move down and potentially be at a lower weight class for nationals or states? Has that been a conversation?
Yeah, for sure. Like I've had it, especially now, like with the new selection process, I've actually had a few nutrition clients ask me what my thoughts are on it. And I always, like, for myself, especially as a nutritionist, within the sport, like I'll never say no, basically. Like I'll always give whichever client asks, I'll give them all the information, right? I'll give them the pros, the cons. It's like, okay, these are the pros and cons staying in this weight class, which is the heavy one. These are the pros and cons for like moving down the weight class. I'll give them all the information around, you know, what it is that they want to know around what I would recommend. And then it's a collaborative approach with me, the coach, and the athlete around like what the best option is. For this year specifically, I've actually got, I think, like 2 or 3 nutrition clients. I won't name names, but they're all choosing to move down a weight class to become more competitive. And I think it just depends, right? Like it depends, I would say, one, how long you've been in the sport for. If you're quite fresh, you know, my natural tendency I would lean into saying like, probably not, unless it was like a solidified, like, yes, you're going to kind of podium, because I think like that's just the long-term thinker in me as a coach and nutritionist. It's like, you know, if you're 2-3 years in, like, look, just stick it out in the heavier weight class. And like, as I said earlier, like build your total, like give yourself the room to grow, because like you will become competitive in the weight class you're in. I think if it's people who are a little bit more experienced and they're kind of more down the track, it's that 5-6 kind of year mark maybe, or even like 4-5-6. And they're sort of expressing that they, you know, they really want to go next year, or they really want to give it a shot, and like this is kind of their option. I'm kind of like leaning more towards that, cool, like let's just do it, because at the end of the day, like I think, you know, if the athlete understands, you know, it's their choice too. Like I can say yes or no, but whatever it is that they choose to do is up to them. But then that also just depends on where the athlete is sitting as well. So I like looking at that, you know, that 3 to 5% weight range above your weight class. If they're kind of sitting pretty comfortably close to that, in terms of like not having filled out the next weight class above, then in my head, again, like there's no real reason as to why cutting down would be a negative option at all. It does just mean that it's, as I said, in a few podcasts with nutrition, it's like it just comes down to people who are in a deficit are they pay a lot more attention to detail. So they actually become better with their nutrition. They come better with it, like in their training, they come better with like their planning. And then that just comes down to like, again, the rehydration strategy as well on the day. So it's like, I just say like, you need to nail everything if you're going to make the decision to move down a weight class. And that sort of, I wouldn't say the pressure, but that sort of expectation is placed on them to be in control of pretty much every single variable they have to be in control of.
Yep. And you mentioned like 3 to 5% above. How about for the people that kind of already solidified in the weight class above, and it is quite a dramatic change? What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, Evie Corrigan did it, so it's kind of like, it's doable, right? Like it just, I would say I've got one client who was doing that this year, who was pretty solidified in the weight class above, and we're choosing to cut down. Again, not going to name names. But again, it's, I would say it just comes down to the same sort of expectations. It's like, you just need to nail everything. I would say from that perspective, if you're pretty solidified in a weight class above, it's going to be looking more at, well, I personally look more at the energy expenditure. So I'm going to try and take minimal calories away, but I'm going to increase your energy expenditure as high as I can outside of training. So that's where like the step counts and things like that sort of come into play. And that's where, again, like the rehydration strategy and like everything that they do, like meal timing, all the other small 1%ers, they're the ones that like you have to really nail. And I'd also probably just say too, like, I think a lot of these clients that I'm talking about specifically, they're all clients who have the big rocks nailed consistently. So they have the very big rocks nailed consistently. Like their sleep is always tracked, hydration is always tracked, like all of the big overarching, things that we need to look at with nutrition are nailed on a day-to-day basis. And they're people that I feel confident and comfortable in doing this with, because I know that they'll hold themselves to a high expectation. Again, like if it's somebody quite fresh to the sport or fresh to nutrition coaching, I would probably be more inclined to say like, let's just stick with the heavier weight class so we can focus on this, like the big things first.
Yeah. And especially because you're aiming for a potential outcome that's going to happen at Nats, right? So it's like, you wouldn't really give it to someone who's trying to do it just to get a shot to go to nationals. It's more so like, if you are looking to be competitive, that's probably the only people that you're about to limit it to.
Yeah. And I think that like that just ties into it as well. Like, it is also the conversation of like the people who are going, like wanting to do this to go to nationals, but then also potentially win nationals and go to worlds, is that conversation of like, this is just a 6-month process. This is going to be a 12, 18-month process of like you having to stay in this weight class and us having to like, keep you within this certain range. So it's like, again, it's that whole long-term game. It's not just like, let's get you to this weight for states and then you can kind of, blow out again and then we have to do the whole process again. It's like, we get you to this weights, you go to states, and then you have to stay here and stay within this range for at least 12 to 18 months, basically.
Yeah. And I guess that's very well put. And to tie things off, it's like, if you are competitive, that's something that you need to consider. But based on our conversation today, like this split is kind of going to make you double down on what you value out of the sport, right? So, and it's okay depending on if you want to have these hyper competitive goals to go to nationals, but if your end result leaves you at states in terms of a competitive standpoint, that's okay too. If anything, that could give you a bit of fuel to the fire, and hopefully next year you can do the same process all over again and you'll come in a more motivated, stronger position, right? So I think from a competitive standpoint, overall, it's a decision that doesn't have to always be negative. If you can reframe it in a way that works for you and find a way for it to help fuel your training, that's probably the best possible option, whether you agree with it or not, right? But aside from that, everyone can pretty much dial in their protocols on the day, and that's probably the best way that you can control what you control to make sure you get to states, make sure you get to nationals. Yeah. Thanks guys for listening to another episode, and we'll see you next time.